Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I have another book review for you, and that is for Pet Sematary by Stephen King. This is the fifth Stephen King book that I have read. But prior to this, the first one I read was Salem's Lot, then I read Carrie, Revival, and Misery. And this is one that I was really excited to read because I've heard amazing things about it. One of his most popular books, and so I've been looking forward to reading it. And I was really hopeful I would enjoy it because I've heard so many great things about it. And I have loved all four Stephen King books that I read prior to this. I have a hard time even picking a favorite one. And I am happy to say this is another one that is in contention for my favorite Stephen King book. If I had, like, gun to my head, had to pick a favorite Stephen King book so far, like, personal favorite could be this one or Revival. I'd probably say the best one I've read is Misery, if I were to make that distinction. But I mean, this is easily in contention for the best Stephen King book I've read because it's amazing. And I had a great time reading it. I read it in like 5 days, I think. Or I think there's one day I wasn't able to read it, so I read it in like 4 days or something like that. I went straight through this book so quickly, and I had a great time with it. So lots of good things to talk about here. A couple little nitpicks here and there that I will talk about, which are spoiler related, so most of this video will be spoiler free. However, my few complaints I can't really talk about without spoiling the book, so there may be a small section in the middle of the video that is spoilery, which I'll denote that in the description and timestamps and things, so you can skip ahead of that if you want to. But plenty of good things to say about this book, though. Like, most of what I have to say about this book is great. So one thing that I love about Stephen King that is done especially well here is his characters. He is one of the best character writers I've ever read. He writes characters that feel so just genuine and real and relatable and just, you know, really well written, really good dialogue, really good interactions between characters. They just feel like people, and I really appreciate that about this book. All the characters in here are well done. It's a relatively small cast. You follow Lewis, who is the main POV character, as well as his wife Rachel and their children. They have 2 children. And then there's also Judd, who is probably my favorite character in this book, partially because he's a Mainer. And those of you who don't know, and I didn't even realize I'm wearing a Maine shirt right now, I'm also from Maine. I have been 2 places mentioned in this book before, and Judd is like quintessential Mainer. Like, the way that he's written in this book is like, I could see it, and I loved him in this book. That was part of the reason I liked him, but he was also just a really interesting character, as well as his wife and a few other characters, a few other minor characters. But those are really the main characters, and that's kind of a small cast of really well done characters that all feel like real people, feel like people who, you can really like get a good sense of who they are, get a good sense of their voice, get a good sense of like, they just feel very genuine and true to life, I guess. And I really enjoyed that in this book. And they're also interesting, Judd himself I found to be a very interesting character. Lewis also is an interesting character, who makes some very interesting decisions throughout this book. And everyone else is done very well also. I also, kind of branching off of the genuineness, the sense of setting in this book I think is really good. That's something I also think Stephen King's good at. I think even if it were the case that I wasn't from the general area that this book takes place in, which certainly helps, but even besides that, like the sense of setting and place that he's able to use within his writing is so well done, and then that's also done very well in this book. You really get a sense of like that kind of rural town feel, and the pet cemetery itself, for which the book is named, has a strong sense of place and atmosphere to it that I really enjoyed as well. And also just the story here is very interesting, where essentially, you have this family that moves to the town of Ludlow, Maine, which I think in the book it's like a fictional version of it, because as far as I'm aware, the actual town of Ludlow in Maine is not the same as the one in this book. It shares the name, but they're a little different. They're in different places, it seems like, and things like that. But either way, they move there. and things are going on, and they discover their neighbor knows of this place called the Pet Cemetery, and there's kind of this weird mystique about it. It's like this ancient Native American burial ground, and if you bury dead things there, things happen with them, and it's weird. I just think, and the way the story explores that is very interesting. And I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the mystery surrounding it. I really enjoyed just kind of seeing what would come next. Like I said, I read this book super quickly, and part of that was because there was just always like this little hint of like, I wonder what's going to happen because of this thing, or I wonder what this is going to lead to. And there's a point in this book where, and I don't really want to spoil anything about it because I knew barely anything about this book going into it, and I don't really want to spoil anything about it if I can. But there's a certain point in this book where something happens, and the gears started turning in my head, and I was like, this is gonna have some major implications for the future of the book, and it certainly did. And I just think that was really well done. And the foreshadowing as well, kind of tied to that. Foreshadowing in this book is great. Subtle enough that you could miss it, but also there enough that you can pick up on it if you're paying attention, which I really enjoyed. Let's see, I also just the sense of doom, I guess is the way I would put it, or dread maybe. I wouldn't say this book is an outright like horrifying, but well, it's horrifying. I wouldn't say it's like an outright horror book, kind of similar to actually some of his other books I would define the same way that I've read, where it's like they're not, this book to me, like it's scary, but it's scary in a very like insidious, like doomy, dreadful kind of way. It's like the feeling of like something's just not right, and that's something I really like about this book. That's something I like in horror in general. I prefer my horror to be in that kind of vein rather than just scary. I like the sense of dread. I like the sense of things just progressively getting worse, and you can see the signs that things are just going to get really bad eventually, and then they do. And just the way that the horror was handled in this book is great. Also, just a great sense of sadness and grief in this book. The way that this book handles like things like the loss of loved ones, the sense of grief that you feel afterwards, the sense of loss, the desire to see your dead family members again, or things like that. Just done so well in this book. This book to me feels, if I were to draw a comparison to other books, it's kind of like the slice of life aspect of his book Revival mixed with the themes of The Fisherman by John Langan, which are two of my favorite books of all time. So I mean, this book was going to work for me. And that theming is something I loved in The Fisherman, and I loved it here. And I just think that it has just such a good, exploration of those themes that I really enjoyed. That is most of the good stuff, which is the vast majority of this book. I loved it. Very well paced as well. It was a slow burn, but it wasn't too slow, and all that stuff. It was just all around a fantastic book. However, I do have a couple of small criticisms that I would like to talk about that I cannot discuss without spoiling this book. So from here on out, or at least I will have markings in the description and timestamps. So if you would like to skip ahead in the video to my final thoughts, you may do so, because I can't really talk about the negatives of this book without going into spoilers. The most spoiler-free way I can say it is that even though I enjoy some of the things that happen in this book, the execution is a little bit off, specifically around the halfway point and kind of in the back half of the book. But beyond that, I kind of have to spoil parts of this book in order to talk about them. So spoilers will begin now, and I will put a timestamp in the description when they're over. So halfway through this book, of course, you have, earlier in the book, you have the cat who dies. Lewis brings it to the pet cemetery. It resurrects, but it's a little bit off, which is really well done, first of all. But also, halfway through the book, the same thing happens to his son, Gage. Gage in this book is 2. I've got a 2-year-old. So reading the parts of this book in the back half that had to do with Gage really hit. I just have to say that. But he dies halfway through this book. He gets hit by a truck because they live right on a really bad road. And I like the way that story is. Like, I think it's a great portion of the story. Like, it works really well, but I don't think that it was organized in a way that I feel would be the most effective, because the way it happens is end of part 1 is halfway through the book. The beginning of part 2, Gage is already dead. And it skips to the aftermath of his death. And then it has a flashback to when Gage actually died, and then a flash forward back to like the funeral and stuff. And then you have this this fake out where he has a dream that Gage is still alive. And it's kind of obvious that it's a little bit of a fake out because it goes through like his whole life all in one chapter. But I didn't like the way that was done. I think it would have been more effective if part 2 or even the end of part 1 had been the death of Gage. And then you have the aftermath. And if you want to have the dream sequence in there, that's fine. I didn't really like the way it was handled all that well. I think it felt out of place. I do think it does a good job of expanding on that theme of grief. Like, I could see someone who had this happen to them experiencing something like that. So I think it works well with the themes, but it just feels a little out of place to me. I just think that the organization and the placement of the events of the book in that portion would have worked better if they had been reversed. I feel like it would have been a little more effective, at least for me. I think that pretty much is the only negative thing I have to say about this book, so I'll end spoilers here. No more spoilers. That one thing is really the only negative thing I have to say about this book. Also, I have to point out one good thing, which again, no spoilers for this part. The ending of this book is perfect. It's Stephen King's endings, aside from Revival, I would say, of the books that I have read, none of them are like exciting, maybe also aside from Carrie, none of them are exciting or like really big endings. Like, I love the big ending. Like, I love Brandon Sanderson. I love the big exciting ending. None of his books that I have read, aside from, Carrie, which does have kind of an exciting ending, and Revival, which doesn't really have an exciting ending, but I think is like also like just a perfect ending. But like Misery, Salem's Lot, and Pet Sematary, and debatably I'd say even Revival as well, they don't have big exciting endings, but they have very thematically fitting endings. And the ending to this book is not exciting. It's not like, oh my goodness, like, holy crap, like big, I mean, it's kind of a twist a little bit, but nothing real crazy, but it is like, it has a sense of finality and inevitability to it. Like, this is the only way I could see this book ending. Like, there's a thing that happens right before the end of the book that directly leads to what the ending is, which if you've read the book before, you know what I'm talking about. Can't really say because spoiler, but like from that point, I was like, this is how this book's going to end. And it did. And I loved that. I thought it was like the perfect ending for this book. It's ambiguous and bleak and dark, but it feels inevitable, and it's such a good ending. I love the ending to this book. Just had to point that out as well because I didn't want to forget about it. So overall, in case you can't tell, I love Pet Sematary. Easily also a contender for my favorite Stephen King book. Like I said, it's hard for me to pick a favorite, really. I would say Salem's Lot is the only one that I can definitively say, and that one I would say is my least favorite so far, even though it's still great. The other four, I would say, all could easily be my favorite. So, all easily a contender for my favorite. Fantastic book. Loved it all the way through. Even those little criticisms I have, like those parts of the books were still good. Just would have liked if they were done a little differently. So, as far as a rating I'd give this book, I'd give it a 9.5 out of 10. Just an amazing book. I knock it slightly because of that one criticism, but even then, it's not a big issue. It only takes off like a small amount. Still a phenomenal book. I loved it. Super impactful, super engaging, great story, great characters, great setting work. I love the sense of atmosphere, the sense of just darkness and dread to it that it has in the later portions. Just a fantastically done book. Cannot praise it enough. So absolutely loved it. High recommendation from me. So that pretty much wraps up my review for Pet Sematary. Let me know in the comments if you've read this one before and what you thought of it. If so, how does it rank in your overall Stephen King books? If you've read several of his books, let me know where this one ranks in comparison. If it's one of your favorites, if it's one of your lesser favorites, whatever it may be, let me know. And let me know which Stephen King book you'd be excited to see me talk about in the future. I'm thinking the next few that I read, unless I buy any more in between now and then, because I would really like to read It, which I don't own yet. But I'm thinking the next ones that I read is going to be some combination of The Shining, The Stand, and Eye of the Dragon. So let me know which of those you think I should go for first. I'm debating between The Shining and Eyes of the Dragon right now. I may read both of them this summer. I was originally going to read Eyes of the Dragon this summer and The Shining in October, but I may try to squeeze them both in this summer because I'm pretty excited about both of those. We'll see. Let me know what you think in the comments. So that's pretty much it for this video. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.